Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony in Diversity, and today we're speaking with Jim Allen. He's a program manager with Anglicare Victoria, Eastern. Thanks for coming in, Jim.
Thanks for the invitation for the program.
You're a man who deals with men's behaviour because Anglicare takes a position on that. Have they been involved in that for long?
Yep, sure. Anglicare started the men's behaviour change programs back in 1994 out at Lilydale.
Okay.
And currently we run 4 group programs a week with about 50 to 60 men.
Right. So how does a man become part of the program? How does he get there?
Sure. So, well, some men do phone us themselves, or they phone us via the men's referral service, which is a telephone counselling service that has a map of all the men's behaviour change that operate in Victoria, and will connect men up to each of the men's behaviour change programs. So some men come by their own volition through the men's referral service. Others come because they've been ordered by courts to attend a men's behaviour change program, or referred from other services.
So you mentioned what sounds like a network of these men's behaviour groups. How big is that? Have you got an idea of how many
There's
of those
about
there are?
35 men's behaviour change groups running in Victoria at the moment.
Right. And they run weekly meetings? Is it weekly? Right.
Most of those programs are weekly programs, I understand. Usually a men's behaviour change group is about 2 hours. Yep.
And the average size, you mentioned 60 before, is that an average size for them?
Well, we have 60 in 4 groups, so an average size for us is about 14 men in each group.
14,
yeah.
Okay. And that'd be a mixture of some who were referred and some who've voluntarily called.
Yep, unfortunately the volunteer men are the minority.
Are they?
Usually there's something that sits behind the man's decision to contact us. So we talk about, usually there's an external motivator that brings him out to seek help. And that can be a variety of things. It could be that his partner has had enough and decided to leave unless he changes his behaviour. Or it could be that the police have attended and taken out an intervention order or a safety notice. Or it could be that he's been charged with assault.
Right.
And the courts have decided that they need to mandate him to do men's behaviour change. Could be the children's court that's mandated him, or the family court.
Now this is probably a ridiculous question, but the profile of these guys, and I'm talking about the physical profile at this point. If you had a group of 14 guys, attendees, is there something which is common, like, for example, are they all big brutish men, or is it sort of range right across, where some of them you wouldn't think they would be violent in 100 years? Is it like that?
I think that it's quite a range. I don't think that looking at a man you can tell whether he uses family violence or not. So we have big men, small men, we have men of different nationalities, different ages. Our core age group in men's behaviour change is probably from 18-year-olds through to 50, but we get some men come in who are older than that.
And their willingness to cooperate in the group, does it start with a reluctance and then warm up, or how does it look? How do we
engage with these guys? Yes. So firstly, they come in for an individual interview with one of the intake workers on the team, where we go through a comprehensive risk assessment, and that involves talking with the man about his motivation to change, the sorts of behaviours he's been using, how often he's been using them,
Right.
getting an idea about who else might be involved with the family or in his life, helping him, providing him with information about the program, about his rights in the program, but also making sure that we get his permission and the contact details to contact partners and ex-partners.
Okay. Right.
And in fact, that's a prerequisite of being able to go in the program.
Okay. So it's completely open. It's
Yep,
yeah,
the fact that we,
yeah.
we contact partners and ex-partners, he will know that when he goes into the program.
Okay.
But the information from the partners and ex-partners and how often we contact is private and confidential to them.
Okay.
We don't share that with
There's
them.
no. So the men themselves, are they fully identified to one another, or do they just use their first names? I'm thinking about Alcoholics Anonymous or one of those sorts of groups where they...
Most with the men, they use their first names. I mean, they've got surnames. It's not that we wouldn't use their surname, but there's no reason to. So we would get, in a typical group, we would get men to introduce themselves to each other in the group and to the facilitators, and to talk about what's brought them to the group, the sorts of things that they'd like to get out of participating in the group.
Right. And so what's the duration, a normal attending duration of a guy? How long?
So for Anglicare, our group is a 20-week group.
20 weeks.
Yep. So 22-hour sessions a week apart. But we have an open rolling group structure. So what that means is that men are at different stages through the program. We can have a guy at week 1 and a guy at week 19 in the same program. And the beauty of that is that the men new to the program get to listen to the guys who've been around for a little while, and some of the things that they've learnt from participating in the program and from reflecting on their experiences of change. So that's the reason why we run group work. We think men learn a lot from each other in structured conversations.
And feel a lot safer inside themselves, I suppose, to have others around them who clearly are suffering something of the same, to give them confidence to speak.
I think the safety comes through with a sense of they know the boundaries. So we're very clear in the program that we won't tolerate ongoing violence. No. Men need to make a commitment to stop their violence to women and children.
And I need to make a commitment to stick to the time. We'll be back. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Jim Allen. He's the Program Manager for Anglicare Victoria Eastern, and we're talking about men's behavioural change. So you've got these guys. They're going through your filters and they're sitting in... What happens?
And we've created a safety plan for their partners. We're in contact with them and hearing about the well-being of the children. And then in the group, we take them through a program that goes for 20 weeks. Very much looking at some of the basic ideas around men's behaviour change, that, choosing violence. Violence is a choice. It's about a behaviour. It's not a feeling. Right. We can't always choose our feelings, but we can choose our behaviour. Looking that the violence is about power and control through intimidating other people. Looking at the types of violence that men use to control women and children. And then we're looking at the impact that violence has on women and children. And so we're also talking about the fact that violence and abuse exists because of attitudes that men hold around their entitlement to use violence, around the use of blaming other people for the choices they make to use violence, minimising the behaviours, both the behaviours that they use that are violent and abusive, but also the impacts that it has on women and children. So there's a fair bit of challenging that we do
Absolutely.
in the program of some of those beliefs that men have held on to that enable them to make choices to use violence.
And does that take the form of lectures in the first instance and then discussion groups? How do you actually raise these very important issues, and oftentimes issues these guys would never have ever considered? How do you bring that about?
We do that through group work. So we have male and female facilitators trained in family violence and counselling, working with the group, facilitating group processes. So helping men have what we would call structured conversations.
Right.
We keep the structure based on their behaviour, their responsibility, not minimising it, not blaming other people. Because they are open rolling groups, we have men in the group who have been to a number of sessions who are finding out that making changes actually pays off for them. And seeing things differently so that they can reflect on how they used to think about their behaviour and their partner and their children, and how now they've learnt to think about them. There's a lot of shame that we work with men, but doing violence and abuse is a very shameful behaviour, and so we avert the shame and we talk about that sense of being able to sit with that shame and seeing that feeling of shame as a good feeling, important feeling. And often I'll say to the men, well, if you weren't feeling shame about your behaviour, what would that say about you and what you think about your behaviour? And of course the answer is that it was okay to do what I did. So actually feeling ashamed of using violence and abuse is a pathway that men need to walk.
So you've got these guys of mixed experience in the course itself together. Do you get the ones who've been there longer piping up and say, listen mate, that's not right, it's like this, with me? Do they cross-fertilise?
Our encouragement with men is that they talk about themselves and their own experience. We don't like the idea of lecturing people or telling people off. I think part of the work is being able to see that men are different than their behaviour and that they can change their behaviour. And that a lot of men that we work with want to have good connected relationships with partners and children. They want to be good dads. They want to know how to be good men, and they want to know how to make those changes and make the changes stick.
I noticed you mentioned that you have females involved as well. That helps with the definition of men's power, does it? Where women can look at it or give them a view of how women see it. Is that the role that those women play?
Partly, I think having female group facilitators in the group stops the group from being a blokies group. It's all of us men in here together. It can stop some of that talk about us poor men and women, they've got it all themselves all right. But it's not just the female facilitator that would challenge that, it's the male facilitator in the group. What I think is important about having female facilitators in the group is that they are very aware of male privilege. And I think male privilege, male entitlement is at the core of many of the choices that the men make to use violence. And being male, I think it's hard for us men to see as clearly the privilege that we have.
Oh, absolutely.
And the other part I think that's important is that the men get to see a male-female relationship in the group that's respectful to each other.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So yes, it can happen. Here it's happening in front of my eyes. You mentioned shame, and shame is a massive issue for people, but so too is fear. Shame and fear. How do you see those manifesting themselves? You see shame, but do you see fear manifesting itself as well?
Well, one of the things that we talk to the men about is to develop a self-awareness of an array of different emotions.
Yes.
that are going on for them all the time.
Mm.
But many of the men that we work with aren't aware of them.
Mm.
Many of them give voice to anger or give voice to happiness, sometimes sadness. But we will talk about all those other emotions that are being held in check or covered over by the anger.
Mm.
If they will learn to go under the anger and sit with some of those emotions
Right.
and stop using them to fuel the anger and fuel ideas around entitlement of being violent and abusive.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of it is habitual and grows out of their previous family experience, and it's deep. But we'll get on to that because we're out of time, and we'll be back in a moment.
Om Mani Allah. Alleluia. Om Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Jim Allen. He's a program manager with Anglicare Victoria, Eastern, and we're talking about family violence and changing men's behaviour. You mentioned this sort of limited access to being aware of emotions that strikes a lot of these men. And anger, there's a scale of anger. How do you work with that from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10? Or?
Yeah, well, a lot of what we say to men is that you can't change the past, but you can learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
And men's experience can often be that they become angry very quickly.
Mm.
They'll often say, I feel fine 1 minute, something happens and bang, I'm angry. And so we will ask them to think about that on a scale from, say, 0 to 10, with 10 being as angry as you've ever been and 0 being not angry at all. And ask them to start to put themselves, to recount an incident where they remember feeling angry and pop themselves on the scale. What they'll often find is that they weren't sitting at a 0 to begin with, they were more like at a 6 or a 7. And so
Yes.
we say, well, if you're not aware of where you're at on that anger scale, you're already at a 6 or a 7, and something happens that doesn't please you, you are going to move pretty easily and pretty quickly to a 10.
Yes.
And we'd say that when emotions are extreme, at their extreme end, it is hard to think of other choices because the brain has a way of closing down with intense feelings. So we're saying learn from that. Learn about where you are at early on and prioritise other people's safety and well-being.
Okay, so it's a matter of sensitising by the sound of it, isn't it? It's sensitising.
Bit of a gauge.
Yeah.
We talk about tools of change, some of the tools that men can take with them, and many of the men can relate to a gauge, a thermometer or a speedo on a car.
Right.
Anything that makes sense to them, anything that'll stick in there. And we'll often say, look, it's easy when things are going well, not to use violence and abuse, but the change is proven over time and under pressure. So it's when the pressure is on that they need to be implementing the strategies and skills that they learn in the men's behaviour change group.
You mentioned earlier about shame. Is there a similar scale for the shame, like when guys are admitting to the shame and getting an idea of the intensity of that, whether it's attached to verbal abuse and then they move into hitting or throwing or whatever it is they're doing, and their shame escalates? Is there something like that?
Well, I think shame is an indicator that it's a feeling that indicates for them that they've done something that's not acceptable.
Right.
And I think there's all sorts of ways of working with shame, and I'm sure that group facilitators do it differently. The way that I like to see it is that its polar opposite is pride.
Okay.
So what balances shame is pride. So yes, we can sit with shame, but what we need to do is feel proud about ourselves. And so I'll say things to them, well, if you were able to stop your violence and abuse, and let's say you were able to do that for 2 years, what difference would that make for your children and your partner? And would you feel a little bit proud that you've managed to make that change? So the investment is in not doing any more behaviours that you feel ashamed of and doing
Right.
ones that you feel proud of.
Right.
So we'll also talk to the men about reparative measures. So yes, you've done this behaviour, yes, it's had those impacts. What can you do about that now? What should you be doing about that now that you fully understand its impact on other people?
Right.
We try and get them thinking about that they perhaps need to be aware that the wounds of their violence and abuse don't heal overnight. This idea of forgive and forget is not on.
No.
Perhaps people won't forget when they've been violated against.
No.
But perhaps they need to keep a knowledge in the relationships that they have of the influence of that past behaviour. Prioritise people's safety and well-being. Perhaps they need to pay for counselling.
Yes.
Perhaps they need to move out of home for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps they need to make it clear that when people are feeling uncomfortable, that it's okay to tell them and they'll back off.
Yeah, is that part of what comes into what you called before a safety plan? Is for each one is to have a plan where maybe counselling is included in it if they reach a certain point? Is that what the plan looks like?
I think that you build on a plan. I think the first plan is that rather than use violence and abuse, walk away.
Right.
The second bit is take time out, and there are things to do on time out. The third bit is that as your awareness builds and you see issues or triggers in your life, that it's okay to seek help and deal with them. And then perhaps the final bit is to learn to prioritise other people ahead of yourself, particularly those that you've been violent and abusive to.
You just mentioned if you were seeking help. Now, there's a couple of numbers that you mentioned earlier, which you'd. So could you give us an idea of what you would do if you wanted to seek help?
Yeah, if you're a man and you're thinking, hey, maybe I need to check out men's behaviour change, maybe my behaviour's not quite right, you can ring the Men's Referral Service, and their number is 1300 766 491. It's
Right.
1300 766 491. If you're a woman involved in a violent relationship, then you could ring Safe Steps Family Violence Response Centre on 1800 015 188. So that's 1800 015 188.
So are they 24-hour, 24 by 7?
The Safe Steps is 24/7/7.
Yep.
Men's Referral Service is 12 hours.
Right.
Yep. But leave a message and they'll call you back.
Okay. So there is a structure out there waiting to respond to this sort of issue.
Yeah.
No, that's excellent. Jim, thanks so much. And we've got issues which we need to discuss further. So would you come back next week so we can follow on with some of the other, like I think it's the for young men. We'll have a look at some of that as well.
Love to. Be a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Jim.
Thanks, Norm.
You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be back next week with Jim Allen to discuss men's behaviour change. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allah.